After releasing my last video on preparing a game, I've had a lot of people express interest on learning more about the topic of Session Zeros. So much so that I thought I'd make the topic of this video. This is going to be another fairly short one, I think, so let's go ahead and dive right in. As I mentioned in my last video, Session Zeros aren't your typical play session. In fact, you generally won't get much, if any, playtime at all. The goal of a Session Zero is actually to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to what they can expect from that game. This is a good chance to work with your players to integrate their characters into the world and setting your game takes place in. Especially when it comes to homebrew games, players will sometimes come to the table with characters prepared for the official setting the game is designed to take place in, rather than your own homebrew world. You'll need to work with your players to make sure that their character ideas make sense in the game world you've designed. I find that Session Zeros work best when players arrive with a general character idea in mind, but have left their options open enough that they can mold it and shape it to fit the world without too much effort. One of my favorite non-D20 based RPGs is Fate Core. Unlike Pathfinder or D&D, Fate Core is a narrative-based game, so it really pushes the collaborative aspects of gameplay. When preparing for a Fate Core game, the idea of a Session Zero is built directly into the rules, in that the GM and the players are expected to collaborate on a number of game facets before the play even starts. Things like world issues, locations, important people, even player characters and their backgrounds will be developed together at the table the first time everyone sits down. In fact, even the game genre itself is usually decided upon together. Now, in games like Pathfinder or D&D, where a number of assumptions about the setting, genre, and the GM's role already exist, this might seem a bit overkill. However, I do think there's a number of ideas we can take from Fate Core's game creation process when integrating our own Session Zeros. Oftentimes, in Pathfinder and D&D games, the GM will face an annoying problem. The players will spend some time on their own coming up with elaborate character concepts with intricate backstories, but rarely do the players stop to consider how each of the characters know one another. It's usually left to the GM to figure this out. This often leads to the ubiquitous tavern start. Having all the characters start in a tavern is an easy yet uninspired way to start a campaign because all the characters are naturally in one place. The GM can just take their story and shove it down their throat, and they have no choice to accept it somehow. But the tavern start is really just a band-aid. It's a solution to a problem that doesn't need to exist in the first place. Taking a page from Fate Core's book, we can sidestep the problem entirely by taking some time during Session Zero to figure out how each character knows one or two other characters in the context of the game setting. Not every character needs to know every single other character, but even by just having a few existing relationships, the GM can create a more interesting starting scenario and craft more intricate and elaborate character arcs if desired. So character relationships are one thing, but what else should we discuss in a Session Zero? As mentioned in the previous video, Session Zero is a great place to lay the general ground rules for the campaign. Are there any ancestry restrictions? Are there any homebrew classes or options the players should know about? These kinds of things can have a major impact on the pre-existing ideas for characters that the players have. What about topics that are off limits? Do any of your players have any traumas that you should consider when you're developing story and encounters? What about topics that your table just finds unsettling or discomforting? Make sure to discuss these things thoroughly so you have a better understanding of what kind of things to really stay away from and what things you can kind of sprinkle in to add a bit more suspense to the game. For instance, maybe Fred is especially sensitive to horror elements, but they don't make him so uncomfortable that it would ruin the game entirely. With his permission, you could sprinkle in a bit of horror here and there to really keep him on his toes. Regardless of your table's preferences, however, it's a general rule of thumb to simply stay away from extra sensitive topics like suicide or rape. These topics are generally not well received by other people, and honestly, you really shouldn't need these kind of topics to tell a compelling story anyway. Lastly, Session Zero is a great time to confirm logistics of play. It's your last real chance to make sure that everyone knows what day the game is going to be played on, at what time, and for how long. If there's a chance that games could run over, make sure that everyone is aware of that and they're okay with it. After Session Zero, the game is ready to play, so all the players should be too. That's the goal. With this episode, we discussed a bit more about what Session Zero is and how it works. We talked about how you can use Session Zero to collaborate on the character creation process and form inter-party relationships to allow the GM to craft better content. We spent some time going over rules discussions and sensitive topics, and lastly we talked about how you can use the session to finalize logistics such as scheduling confirmations. This list is by no means exhaustive, and you are welcome and encouraged to come up with your own topics to discuss in your own Session Zeros. Every table is different, so it's up to you as the Game Master to ensure all your bases are covered before you start play. I'd love to hear in the comments what kinds of things you'd like to include in your own Session Zeros, and don't forget to hit that sub button if you like the content you see. We're trying to hit our first goal of 100 subscribers as soon as we can. Until next time, happy gaming.